Hello, everyone. Welcome. We're so happy to see you and to be with you and to commune with you at this reading. We're so excited to have Elias Khoury and Susan Abulhawa, two very acclaimed writers here with us tonight, or if you're in the US in the afternoon. I'm Hana Morgenstern. I'm a lecturer in post-colonial and Middle East literatures at the University of Cambridge. And this is the second event in a series of readings on the theme of literature and archive. The first event, which was about a month ago, featured the Iranian writer Amir Ahmadi Arian, the Palestinian British writer Isabella Hamad, and the Iranian American writer Azarine van der Ulumi. So the series is a collaboration between Archives of the Disappeared, which is based at Cambridge University, Literatures of Annihilation, Exile, and Resistance at the University of Notre Dame, and the Religion, Conflict, and Peace Initiative at Harvard University. And these three initiatives intersect in their interest in exploring contemporary literatures of the Middle East and North Africa, and especially their role in light of political violence, cultural erasure, neocolonialism, and imperialism in the region today. So we ask, how do literatures of the region document, archive, preserve, reimagine, and rewrite collective and personal narratives? And in what ways do they capture that which the historical record cannot, including the traces, ruins, memories, utterances, disappearances, and silences left behind? I'd like to thank the Dean of the College of Arts and Letters and the Co-School of Global Affairs, as well as the Kroc Institute for International Peace Studies at Notre Dame. And I'd also like to thank Newnham College and Crash at Cambridge University for their co-sponsorship. I'd also like to thank Alyssa Doro, Azarine van der Ulumi, Atalia Omer, Hilary Rantisi, Yael Navarro, Mavish Ahmad, and Mesna Kato with help planning this event. And now I'm going to hand it over to Mesna Kato, who is a fellow in history at Newnham College at Cambridge University, and she will be introducing Susan Abulhawa. Take it away, Mesna.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. It's my great honor to introduce the writer, the novelist, the poet, the scientist, the essayist, the activist, and the mom, Susan Abulhawa, whose work has been so incredibly important for in narrating and in writing and thinking through the contemporary, as a historian at least, this is my prejudice, the contemporary history of Palestinians in exile after the Nakba. I'm particularly pleased, I'm particularly excited to hear her read from her latest novel, Against the Loveless World, that is already beginning to reap prizes, including, I think, just yesterday being announced as a finalist for the Aspen Words Literary Prize. And I especially delighted in introducing a person whose literary work has also been coupled with incredible fostering of young writers, Palestinian and otherwise, who write on Palestine as part of efforts that have culminated most recently in the Palestine Rights Festival, a monumental task and event in its own right. Yeah, so I'll leave it at that, but we're so delighted to have you with us, Susan, and we look forward to our conversation.
Thank you, Mesna. I'm delighted to be here. It's an honor, actually. Thank you for that kind introduction. I think you guys wanted me to read, correct? So for those who don't know, my new book is about a Palestinian woman who begins her life in Kuwait and sort of moves through Jordan and then to Palestine following the so-called the Gulf War the attack and occupation of Iraq. And this is, I'm going to read from the early, two passages from the early chapters.
I want to thank all the organizers of this event and my colleagues. It is really an honor and a privilege to introduce Elias Khoury today. It's also a daunting task, as he's one of the most prominent novelists writing in Arabic today. Elias Khoury has authored 13 novels, 4 volumes of literary criticism, 3 plays, and scripted the film of his celebrated novel, Gate of the Sun. He helped found the journal Al-Karmen with the renowned Palestinian poet Mahmoud Darwish, and today continues his work as an editor and journalist, and is an important public intellectual in Lebanon and the wider region. He's also the global distinguished professor of Middle Eastern and Arabic Studies at NYU, and has taught at Columbia University, the Lebanese University, the American University of Beirut, and the Lebanese American University. Many of his works have been celebrated as masterpieces, and among his many awards are the Palestine Prize for Gate of the Sun, which was named Best Book of the Year by Monde Diplomatique, the Christian Science Monitor, and the San Francisco Chronicle, and a notable book by the New York Times. In addition, as Though She Were Sleeping, another novel of his, received France's inaugural Arabic Novel Prize. His novels, which draw the inspiration from the Lebanese Civil War and the Palestinian reality, enthrall us into the daily mundane life, human strife of people, trying to make sense of life, death, and history. As I read his works, I feel torn, both by their locality as well as their universal significance, and how it impacts my life on a deeply personal level. My name is Adam. The first title of the trilogy, Children of the Ghetto, I have the Arabic version here, has been translated into English and will be part of the focus of our discussion today. In Children of the Ghetto, Khoury uses storytelling to masterfully spell out what history fails or does not dare to reveal, either because facts are too unbearable or because history is written by the victors, not the victims whose voices Khoury insists on bringing forth. Much of the narration reveals the historical trauma and silenced memories of the Nakba. As a Palestinian from Lidda, where my ancestors lived for many generations, this novel hits close to home. The death march of my father and his family out of Lidda is etched in my memory in all its horrors and details. Yet, the silenced memories of those who remained and experienced life in the ghetto is one that shook me to the core. The absence and silences of the Nakba that are not documented in history books, but repressed in people's existence, is at the heart of this magnificent book. Thank you, Elias Khoury. We are honored to have you with us today.
Shukran. Shukran, Hilary. Thank you, Hilary. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for inviting me here. I'll be reading a small paragraph from My Name is Adam, the Children of the Ghetto. I will begin by reading 2 minutes in Arabic, just to give you the musicality, because I work a lot on the musicality of the words, which unfortunately they are not all the time revealed in translation. Although this translation, which I'll be reading from by Humphrey Davis, is a great work of translation, and I'm indebted to him because actually he and other translators make the characters of my novels speak different languages, most of the time languages which I do not understand. So now they are better than me in dealing with the world, and I envy them. So I'll begin by reading a small paragraph, and then I'll go to in Arabic, then I go to the English. It's relating the story of in Lidda, the Israelis built for the people who were left behind, who did not go to this death march that Hilary spoke about. They encircled them with wires, and they kept them in a small area between the Cathedral of St. George and the big mosque and the hospital. And the Israeli soldiers called it the Ghetto, and they ordered the youngsters of the Ghetto to work. And some of them were supposed to clean the city. Some others were supposed to collect bodies and bury them, and then burn them. And one of the groups was supposed to loot the city. So I will be telling you one small story of these looters. قال مراد عن تلك الأيام: اسمع، صحيح أن لما الجثث ودفن البقايا كان العمل الأكثر صعوبة، لكن في تلك الأيام كانت فرقتان من الشباب تعملان في النهب وتنظيف الطرقات. أنت كنت رضيعا ولا تتذكر شيئا، لذا لا تستطيع مساعدتي في تذكر الأسماء، وأنت تعرف أن العمر له حق علينا، وحقه يبدأ في الذاكرة، والذاكرة تنسى، وأول شيء تنساه هو الأسماء. في البداية يختفي الاسم، ثم شيئا فشيئا تبدأ الملامح في التلاشي إلى أن يختفي الشخص في اسمه. Now I go to the English so that everybody can understand me. And I'm going
Elias,
to
do you mind
American.
just trying to speak a bit louder? So
Okay.
Yes,
Now everybody's hearing me well. Okay.
Thank you.
I will go to the English. I'm referring to the American edition of the novel, not the English one, and it's on page 407. Murad spoke of those days. Look, it's true that collecting the bodies and burying the remains were the hardest parts of the work. But during these days, there were two teams of young men working on looting the city, clearing the roads. You were a baby and don't remember anything, so you can't help me remember the names. And you know that old age has its claims, which begin with memory, and memory forgets. And the first thing it forgets is names. First, the name disappears, then little by little, the features evaporate, and finally, the person vanishes into his name. I wanted to interrupt him to say that in that case, the name was finally the bearer's grave, and that when the name was forgotten, its bearer disappeared, and the person along with and is disappeared, and the person along with it. However, I said nothing. I felt that the transformation of our names into our graves was the height of abomination. He recounted that the youth whose name he couldn't remember had told him about the orgy of looting that took place at the direction and under the supervision of the Israeli army. The youth whose name we've forgotten said his team was made up of 5 persons, and that its job was to clear the commercial establishments of their contents. We entered the stores, whose doors had mostly been ripped off, and we emptied them of everything. We had to fill the small army trucks with canned goods, grains, flour, sugar, milk, everything. At first, we felt ignominy and shame. Why did we have to loot ourselves? Why did we have to rob our city for the benefit of these people? We knew that the trucks would go to Tel Aviv, and we worked with gritted teeth under the pressure of fear. After a couple of days of work, though, everything changed. We became full of enthusiasm and felt the ecstasy of thieves. We stole fearlessly because the army was protecting us and began to enjoy the looting. Screw us and what we'd become, said Murad. Can you believe it? You have to, because I did. That's what puzzles me. How did we become looter and looted, thief and victim? It's amazing. Did you ever experience such a thing? No one but us has ever tasted the moment of ecstasy felt by the victim when he flogs himself. And no one can understand the feeling. Even I, who am telling you about it, can't understand it. The young man whose name we've forgotten said that after they'd finished the commercial establishments, the more difficult job began. This required joining the team that had cleared the streets and cleaned the military governor's office with theirs. That morning, we discovered that a new team had been added to ours, and we were given orders to the effect that our new job was to empty the houses of every piece of furniture. The Israeli officer told us he wanted everything that was inside the houses and made it clear that we must leave nothing behind. We were to go into each house, clear it out, and clean it. Even the doors and the windows we were to unhinge and load onto other larger army trucks. This new job was more difficult than the first. You might say we'd become porters, and we would return in the evenings, our backs broken from carrying furniture, all of which the truck took away. The work was exhausting, but we didn't face any difficulties worth mentioning. And if we came across a bloated body in any of the houses, the order would come from the officer to get out of the house right away, and he'd splash kerosene around and set fire to the house, saying that it was better for the health of the city. We knew there were teams for collecting the bodies, so we couldn't understand why the officer would set fire to the house. He could just have ordered us to take the body to the cemetery and get on with the looting. The young man told Murad that their group had faced two hard cases. In the first, the officer had almost shot the young man, called the Egyptian, and the second case was his own. We called him the Egyptian because he was dark-skinned, but he wasn't Egyptian. He lived with his parents and three sisters in the church and never stopped telling jokes. When we went in to loot one of the houses, though, the Egyptian discovered that it was his own. At first, he led us through the rooms, showing off the beauty of the furniture, which his father had brought from Damascus. We began loading up as usual and got to a large mirror in the living room, about 2 meters tall, with an oak frame topped with a wooden triangle resembling a crown that was inlaid with Damascene mother of pearl. The Egyptian held on to the mirror and shouted, "No, I am taking this to my family." The soldier who was accompanying us inside the house didn't understand what was happening. He went up to the Egyptian, said something in Hebrew, and left the house. I, as head of the team, asked the Egyptian to step back and let go of the mirror, but he just clung to it more fearlessly. The four of us formed a circle around him in an attempt to persuade him that such carrying on was pointless. I told him, we'd looted the whole city, so why not this mirror? In a moment, they'll make some dumb problem for us. But instead of us convincing him, his attitude started to get to us, and the mirror became a symbol of all the impotence and shame we'd felt during those days of looting. The soldier came back accompanied by a surgeon who spoke Arabic and who asked us what was going on. I replied that we decided the Egyptian was right, and we weren't going to take the mirror to the truck. We were going to carry it to the ghetto because they had no right to take it to Tel Aviv. I don't know where I found the courage to say what had to be said. Sergeant Troni, I think that was the name of the blonde blue-eyed sergeant, told us to load the mirror onto the truck immediately. Plus a lot of stuff along the lines of our not having any right to take state property. He raised his stick and advanced with the soldier who also had a stick behind him. But instead of retreating, the Egyptian glued himself to the surface of the mirror, blending into its image, and we saw all of us inside it, 5 Palestinians and 2 Israeli soldiers inside a Damascene mirror. The soldiers fell on us and started beating us. Our concern was to protect the mirror from them, so we too glued ourselves to its surface. The blows from the sticks raining down on our heads while we screamed and cursed. The living room filled with Israeli soldiers who beat us with sticks and rifle butts, and blood began to flow. Suddenly, the mirror started to break into shards. I couldn't see clearly because my eyes were filled with blood, but I saw how our images in the mirror began to splinter and the color red to consume us, and how, when the Egyptian fell to the ground, the mirror fell on top of him and broke into little pieces. Our image disappeared, and we and the Israeli soldiers were covered with blood, which oozed from our splinter-filled bodies. Thank you. Khalas, it's enough.
Thank you very much, Elias and Susan, for those beautiful readings. So I just want to encourage those of you in the audience who'd like to ask a question to send your question directly to me in the chat. I already have a few lined up. And before we get to that, though, we have a few questions that Hillary and Mesna would like to pose to just get our conversation started. So I'm going to pass it over to you, Hillary, and then you and Mesna can take turns with a few questions, and we'll move over to the audience right after that.
Great. Mesna, do you want to start with a question?
Take it away, Hillary.
Okay. So I will start with a question for Elias, and it's, I mean, again, it connects to what I shared in the introduction and about the Death March. And for people from Lidda, most of them who were forced out of Lidda, like my father and his family, the date of July the 12th, 1948 marks the day, at least for my family, that they were evicted. And this past summer, I realized that this exact date, the 12th of July, 1948, is also the date of Elias Khoury's birth. It's his birthday. And so it raises questions for me of if this is one of the reasons that, Elias, that you chose to excavate and unearth what happened in Lidda, and how did you go about your exploration?
Thank you, Hilary. First, thank you for mentioning my birthday. All of us have birthdays, but there is nothing special in that. The special thing, actually, being born in 1948 was always for me a special thing. Since I was young, I joined the Palestinian struggle, and all the time I remember that my age is the age of the Palestinian Nakba, and it became something very, very, very close to my soul. Now, practically about the Lidda thing, there are two elements. The first one is I discovered by hazard when I was going through archives that there was a ghetto in Lidda. And then I discovered that there were ghettos all over Palestine. There was a ghetto in Lidda, a ghetto in Ramla, a ghetto in Haifa, a ghetto in Jaffa, a ghetto in Akka, and of course the country, Galilee was under military control. All the villages which stayed were practically closed. So if you leave the village, you need a permission from the military government. So Palestine was ghettoized, totally ghettoized in 19th after the declaration of the state of Israel. Now, of course, as you know, 80% of the Palestinians who lived in the area that was occupied by Israel, which was something like 78% of Palestine, these Palestinians, most of them became refugees, and they were forced to leave. Between those who were forced to leave were the population of Lydda, but the way they were forced to leave was very savage, was extremely savage. And then I began to read about those people who left, and I found some testimonies. One of them, a major one of them, was an article published by the Palestinian professor Raja Abu Sayla, the late Raja Abu Sayla, who told the story of the Death March. This was the first time I acquainted the Death March of Lydda. And then because of the ghetto, I began my research, and I began working on Lyd. Of course, I've never been to Lyd. I'm not a Palestinian, although I'm not a Palestinian, and I have no right to go to Palestine or to Israel, and so I had to make my research from inside. And I have to contact people inside. So I had many friends in Lydda itself, with Skype, with pictures, with photos, and the best one of the best events in my literary career was when I was invited to speak in Lydda, and it was last year. It was for the commemoration of the Lydda, and the thing took place in the ghetto, in what was called the ghetto. Now, by the way, for those who do not know, if you come to Ben Gurion, to Lydda Airport, now they call it Ben Gurion Airport, it's Lydda Airport, and take a taxi and you tell him, take me to Lydda, to the Arab ghetto, he will take you there. Till now, the name is a ghetto. And Ramla, till now, the place name is ghetto. So I didn't invent anything. All what I've done was to try to understand this terrible experience, and to find out a way to express it. So my novel is mainly not about speaking, but about silence. Not about expressing, but about the inability to express. About the victim who is silenced not only by force, but also by shame. It's a combination of elements that silence the victims. And in this sense, I discovered the city, and then I now have friends in that city. And my last friend was when a friend of mine gave me a small book written by a Palestinian Anglican pastor. How do you call it in English? Pastor, whose name is Auder Rantisi, who by hazard is the father of Hillary, and I read his book, and he describes this march, and his testimony will be a major part of the third volume of this novel. So now my relation with this. Actually, I want to write literature. I'm not writing this. What I was trying to do in this book, like in all my books, I'm not a historian. I'm not a defender of the Palestinian cause. Although I am, as a citizen, a defender of the Palestinian cause. What I'm doing in literature is trying to investigate the human experience in depth. So the Palestinian experience is a human experience. And thus the Palestinian tragedy is a big question to the human consciousness. Otherwise, it will be part of all the tragedy, of all the stupidity, of all the stupidities of history, because history is is full of stupidities everywhere. And in this sense, the Palestinian himself, the Palestinian being man or woman, reflects for me this aspect of love. I wrote about Lidda because I love Lidda. I wrote about my Palestinian characters because I love them. For me, this is a message, a letter of love, not more than that. And you will see in all my in the Gate of the Sun, or here in the Children of the Ghetto, love is a major player in the novel. It's not marginal, because I don't think we can write and we can express ourselves without love and through love. And in this sense, it's a book of love, not of hatred. Although the experience was and is still very tough, because unfortunately, as you all may realize, the Nakba did not happen in 1948. The Nakba is happening now. The Nakba is a continuous process. Now, if you go to the West Bank, or if you go to Gaza, or if you go even to Galilee, or to the Triangle, you'll feel how the Nakba is still continuing. So I'm not speaking about history. I'm speaking about the present. When I write about Lidda, I'm not speaking only about 48. I'm speaking about now.
Thank you very much. I mean, it's like you said, it's about love. It's a love letter, and I guess this is a connection with also moving on to a question for Susan and your wonderful book, your latest novel. And then towards the end of the novel, we learn the connection of the title of the book with James Baldwin's writings. And if you don't mind, I'll just quote what you had quoted from his letter to his nephew, Big James. Here you were, to be loved, baby hard, at once and forever, to strengthen you against the loveless world. And in the following conversation between Nahir and Bilal, they talk about how love is the only way to survive colonialism. And to survive by loving each other means to love our collective memory, who we are, where we come from. There's a very strong symbolism here, and throughout your novel, you make similar strong intersectional connections that are in your work in writing. Why was it important for you to make these connections that you make in the novel?
Well, the characters are the ones making those connections. Nahir, from the reading that I gave, you can see she kind of starts her life out being rather, kind of shallow ambitions, dreaming of the right man and babies and modern appliances. But she, her life sort of sweeps her up in all its messiness. And at one point she becomes a sex worker. And ultimately she becomes a freedom fighter. And the story is narrated from an Israeli prison cell. So the man that she does ultimately fall in love with is also a fighter, and they're both flawed in different ways. But I think one of the important features of being a revolutionary is to be able to make these connections. It is to read. I mean, if we look at some of the greatest revolutionaries that we know, they were voracious readers who through books were able to make these internationalist connections. Palestine is unique in many ways, but it's also a very typical story of settler colonialism. I mean, if you look at, how this country was settled, the parallels are striking. And of course, there's differences in time and scope of the land and so forth, but it was very much the same. Europeans came to this country with a sense of divine entitlement. They called it manifest destiny, and the indigenous people who had inhabited this land since forever. Were demonized, and when they fought back, they were, they were called savages or terrorists and whatnot. So I think, understanding that our struggle is actually part of a much larger fabric of struggle against colonialism in general, capitalism in general, and this sort of desecration of everything that is life-giving for profit is part of the Israeli. It's part of their ethos, really. I mean, if you look at, not just their colonization of Palestine, but what they export to the rest of the world. I mean, they are literally the biggest death exporter per capita in the world. I actually did a study on that and presented my findings, and they per capita, Israel surpasses every country in the world, including the United States and China and Russia, in export of death machines. So I think for the characters themselves, that having this intersectional understanding of other struggles, in particular Black liberation struggles, I think that I think that's important. Some of my own personal heroes were almost all African American, and certainly many South Africans and South American revolutionaries. So, and one of my favorite writers happens to be James Baldwin. So, I took that liberty of making him a favorite of one of the characters as well.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Misna, take it away.
Well, I know that we have tons of questions, but I'm going to take liberty to ask you, Susan, about this incredible novel. I have many questions, but one of the things that I'd like to link it a little bit to the theme of the conversations we've been having around archives of annihilation, disappearance, is reading your novel and thinking through what it means and what it takes for this character Nahid to narrate her life, and to do so from in a condition of incarceration and confinement. But there's tension in the novel between her desire to narrate and her refusal to do so. And I think this kind of tension of the victim who is demanded to always narrate their trauma is one that, at least as certainly as a historian or any researcher, you grapple with. And also, who is she narrating for, and why, and what does it do for her, but what does it take from her too? So I was wondering if you can tell me a little bit about how you grappled with that in thinking about her as a character and fleshing out how she made that decision, or these series of decisions to tell her story. And what you think it kind of says about broader ideas of what conditions of exile and statelessness and migration demand of these figures on the move in how they speak and when they speak, or when they're allowed to be listened to, in fact.
Thank you, Mesna. I want to just say, like, it's how wonderful it is to have questions from a sensitive reader that you picked up on that. I really appreciate that. Not many people, many people do. But actually, from the very beginning, she says, I want to tell my stories as storytellers do, with emotional anchors and feelings. But, one of the things that happens to her in that cell, and this can be seen as sort of, survival tactic, is to, she feels nothing. And that she says that, I feel nothing, I'm numb in here. And there's another passage in which she says, nothing stirs in here, not even the heart. And there's an earlier passage too, when she's one of the few prisoners who gets visitors, and sometimes people come and interview her and whatnot. And she also refuses to speak to them in English, even though she can. Her English is not great, but she can understand them. But she refuses, insisting that they bring an interpreter and they speak on her terms. So these are like little victories that she has in isolation, but it's also part of the sort of answering and narrating and explaining yourself on other people's terms. And Nahed is very much, aware of that, and she, but she's also quite powerless. I mean, she's a prisoner in an isolation cells, but she does find these ways to have the last word, or some sense of power or control over her life. Mm-hmm. And narrating then becomes a larger part of that as well. When I was writing this book, unlike my previous novels, where I really very intentionally just kind of had a one track mind of just a singular loyalty to the characters, not thinking about the reader or my publisher or anything else. And but with this one, I was aware of this Western gaze, and particularly because I was terrified that I was going to fall into Orientalist traps, because I was talking about a sex worker in the Arab world, and I was talking about patriarchy and the way men exploit women and harm women. I wanted I wanted that to be authentic and real, but I'm writing in English. Like, if I was writing in Arabic as a first language, this wouldn't even be a concern. But because I write in English and my first readership are Westerners, I had a real fear of again, like falling into some Orientalist trope that I didn't even realize I did. So I tried very hard not to do that, and that meant sort of going back and forth. First complete loyalty to the reader, and then in another brain just trying to read it as a sort of not the writer, as somebody's just kind of reading. So that's part of this tension of narrating your story. And as far as like having explaining yourself, and I do detest that, and I refuse it. I write these stories, again, I mean, my loyalty is 100% to the characters, which by default means that I'm writing it for Palestinians. And in fact, I mean, I would say that, they are my most important readership. Like when I read comments by Palestinians, those are the ones that I care really the most about. I feel like sometimes we don't do enough inward work within our own community for the next generations of bequeathing memory. one of the devastating things in my life is that, my grandmothers died without me really probing their memories enough, and I want to commit to paper in a way that is that's artistic. I want to commit memory, collective memory and individual memory. I want to to explore lives that aren't, in ways that aren't cliche, in ways that sort of go outside the boundaries where we're allowed to go.
Thank you so much. Mesna, did I cut? Where were you about to say something?
Okay, yeah, but I'm going to save it. I took a note because there's a follow-up, Susan. But let's open it up for sure.
Yeah, let's. I'm going to just come to the audience. We have questions in the chat. I see a question from Evelyn Ophir. Would you like to read that question out loud so we can hear audience voices as well?
You're on mute.
Hi, Mr. Khoury, I heard you in Cambridge in Massachusetts read. And, as a Jewish person who lived in Israel for 13 years, it was so painful for me to hear that mirror story. So painful, I'm truly working. I'm trying to get to Israel to just acknowledge, to just, and I heard our own stories, and I'm sure that's what you meant, when you talk about Ghetto, when you talk about Death March. Why are we so stubborn, So that's just my comment. And it hurts so deeply. There's nothing, anyway. My only question, and it did strike me when you were in Cambridge, is how are you able to, as a Lebanese person, how are you able to experience the Palestinian narrative? Are you talking about similar feelings? Where does this pathos come from, Mr. Khoury?
Oh my God! First, your comment. I share with you the comment. It's hope, but hope. Every year, with every new year, every time going on, we feel that hope.
We can come together. I believe it, but we have to be more humble and not so arrogant. But let me be quiet. Excuse me.
Okay, but now to go back to the second question. I don't understand the question because first I'm a writer who I do not write about myself. I don't think that I deserve to write about my personal experiences. I write about others. I go to others. I think that the novel is a journey. In the 1001 Nights, Sindbad used to leave Baghdad in his 7 journeys in order to come back, and he came back in order to tell stories of the others. So actually, literature is a big trip towards others, towards places. Now, the other thing is that the Palestinian experience. I live in Lebanon, and refugees are all over. Palestinian refugees are all over. They were with me in the school, and the first time I visited the refugee camp, I think I was 13 or 14, and I was astonished. And then in 1967, I went to Amman. There was a conference, and we went to the Baqa refugee camp, which was at that time, the Baqa was a real camp with tents. And I was with some friends, and one of the friends began crying, and he told me, "What shall we do?" And my reply was, "We stay here. We stay with them. If you identify with the other, you have to be with him or with her. And for me, the Palestinian tragedy is part of in this sense, is part of the human tragedy. You don't need to be a Jew to feel that the tragedy of the Holocaust is yours. And you don't need to be a Palestinian to feel the tragedy of. I'm not comparing. I don't like this comparison, and I'm not trying to fishing comparisons. But what I'm trying to say is, you don't need to be a Palestinian to feel the tragedy of the Nakba. All what you need is to open your heart and to travel towards the catastrophe and to live there. And actually. As I told you, I never visited Palestine. I cannot visit Palestine, unfortunately. But practically, when I was writing The Gate of the Sun, for example, I know the villages which I wrote about by heart. I can guide you there. If I go there, I can guide anybody there. Now with the children of the ghetto, I don't only know Lidda, but I know Haifa. I know Wadi Nisnas very well. I know it. I know all the alleys of the Wadi Nisnas, and now in the third volume, I know well Jenin, and I know when, and of course, I'm in love with Nablus, with this one of the most beautiful cities in the region. So practically, you have to. What I've done all my life, even when I wrote about Lebanon, I don't know who knows Lebanon. I know I know the neighborhood where I live. I know Beirut. I'm a Beiruti, but I don't know Tripoli. And I wrote a whole novel entitled Sinalkol about Tripoli, so I had to go there and live there, and so I had to travel, and this is the essence of literature. For me, the essence of literature is a travel. And it's about expressing love. I cannot write about characters whom I hate. In the second volume of the novel, which will come very soon, I hope, you will see there is a Polish Jewish character who was a great character by all means. Who was one of the leaders he was the leader actually of the revolt of the Warsaw Ghetto, and unfortunately I couldn't meet him when I went to Warsaw. He was dead, but I went to his tomb, and I learned from him a lot. His name is Adelman. He was a medical doctor, and this man, after the end of the Second World War, refused to immigrate. Because he was part of the Bund, and his feeling was that we have to stay near the tombs of the people we love. We have to stay in Warsaw. We have to stay near the ghetto, and so it's a love story. Even otherwise I will not write. Otherwise there is no reason to write. There is no. And actually, I do not express myself. I learn from others how to express myself. So myself, they are my mirrors, like the mirror I read about here, in this small paragraph of my novel. The others are the mirrors of literature, and in this sense, you don't need to be a French to write about Paris, and you don't need to be a Palestinian to write about Lidda.
Thank you, Elias. Thank you very much. We'll do one more audience question and then come back to you, Mesna, and then see if we have some more time after that. So Hajar Mahfoud, are you still with us?
Yes, I am here.
Go ahead and read your question.
Thank you. Actually, I had two questions. I'm Hajar from the University of Surrey, and I'm doing my PhD in literature. I'm so glad to be part of this beautiful discussion. The first question is for both writers, actually. To what extent do you think that Palestinian case has changed since the events of Syria? And I'm writing about Syria precisely, or I'm asking about Syria precisely, is because the Syrian system is one of the few Arab systems that clearly states that they support the Palestinian cause in general. So what could change? And the second question is I was somehow disappointed in an interview with poet al-Madhoun, who also was born in Damascus, and he's from the young generation. What shocked me was that there is no relationship with the homeland, Palestine. So what do you think? I mean, what are your reflections about the new Palestinian generation who really suffer from a sort of erasure of Palestinian memory and belonging? Is there any way to restore this? I mean, I felt heartbroken when I saw a poet from my age who really doesn't have the sense of this passion, to his country, to his homeland. So how about our dear Palestine?
Suzanne.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Elias. I'll let you.
No. Okay. First of all, about the Syria thing, I live in Lebanon, and the experience of the Palestinians of Lebanon with the Syrian regime is terrifying. From Tel Zatar on, the hundreds or thousands of Palestinian militants who were kidnapped from Lebanon and taken to prisons in Syria is unbelievable. So to tell me that the Syrian regime was with Palestine, for me, this is a little bit problematic. The Syrian regime used Palestine in order to oppress first the Palestinians and then the Syrian citizens. Here, we never felt as militants in the Palestinian struggle such a pressure like when the Syrian army occupied Lebanon. So I'm sorry, this is only the propaganda of the regime. I never bought it. This terminology is no more, and the terminology played a major role in destroying. This is the way they try to destroy the idea of Palestine. The idea of Palestine is an idea of freedom. The idea of Palestine is an idea of democracy. Otherwise, Palestine is meaningless. And we cannot expect from a despotic regime to liberate Palestine for us. And they are not interested in that anyway. They were never interested in that. Not only the Syrian regime, but all the Arab military regimes, or the other regimes that now are showing us the real faces in the Gulf, who are seeking protection from Israel, and for them, they think they took us back to Abraham and all this mythical thing and so on. The second thing about I don't remember the name of this poet. I really don't know him, but of course you can find Palestinians are people like any people in the world. You can find diversity, people who. And in any people, you can find people who want to refuse their identity, or accept their identity, and this can happen anywhere on earth. And the Palestinians are a normal people. They are neither heroes nor giants, nor terrorists, nor they are like everybody on earth. And like everybody on earth, there are people, Palestinians, who immigrated to the West or elsewhere, and they wanted to integrate, like the Lebanese, like the Syrians, like the Europeans in America, and so on and so forth. Now, what is very important for me is that the idea of return to Palestine is not based upon a mythical, religious problematic. There is no myth for us about Palestine. Even Palestine is not sacred. The Europeans spoke about Jerusalem, about the sacred land. It was during the Crusaders they invented this term. In Arabic, we don't have anything sacred. There is no land. There is nothing sacred. Even Mecca is not sacred. We don't call Mecca sacred. We call Mecca Makkah al-Mukarrama, Makkah, that is, I don't know how to say it in English. Suzanne, maybe she can tell you. So the idea of return is based upon the reality that the Palestinian people, half of the Palestinian people is still in Palestine. We are not only returning to a land, we are returning to a people who is still struggling, still insisting on stay and surviving, and this reality of the Palestinians. Not only, I'm not speaking only about the West Bank and Gaza. I'm also speaking about Israel itself, about the Galilee, about the Naqab, the Negev, about the triangle where the Palestinians stayed. And because they stayed, they open for us a horizon of return. Otherwise, there is we don't have any myth, yani, we're not promised this land from anybody. And I personally, I am a total secular, so I don't believe in anything that's promised by God. But nonetheless, anybody can believe in it. For the Arabs, Palestine is not promised land. Palestine is a land of meeting, where we go back to meet our souls, to meet our brothers and sisters, to meet our land. So I'm not afraid from declarations like that, and we don't have to panic about it. No, Palestine will survive because the Palestinians, since 72 years from now, they managed to survive under such severe conditions, and they are till now surviving. Thank you.
Thanks for taking that first. Elias, I actually wanted to formulate my thoughts because I have to admit the question kind of irked me a little bit in that I just, and this is not on you to the person who asked it, but for a couple of reasons. Number one, because I know it's not true that the Syrian regime, neither the current one or his father, Hafez Assad, truly stood with Palestinians. But that's not the point. The point I want to make is that Palestinians form an ancient society with an ancient heritage, ancient traditions, and our relevance in the world is not measured by the political whims of the region. It's not measured by, by Israel, what's happening in their political system. It's not measured by, what's happening in Syria or Iraq. Our belonging to that land, our struggle, is something unto itself that is sometimes, influenced and shaped by not just what happens in the region, but in the world. So that's one of part of the what came to mind. But the other thing is that we're talking about every time we talk about Palestinian creativity, Palestinian artistic production, no matter what we talk about with Palestine, the questions always become about some political abstract in the region. When Palestinian artists and writers have for the past decades have produced extraordinarily beautiful and works of art, of film, of literature, of song, and the stuff we're doing, this whole community, a lot of young people, young artists, Palestinians in Palestine and in the diaspora and all over the world. Yani am bibdo. There's no word for that in English, but somehow our entire existence sort of has to get distilled down to what is, well, what Bashar al-Assad is doing, for example. I don't really give a shit about him. I care about the Syrian people. I care about our region. I care about the safety of human beings in the region. I care about our cultural productions in the region, about all the things that are being lost and looted and stolen and destroyed by outside forces, by utterly incompetent leaders and mediocre men who are just giving everything away and allowing everything to be destroyed as if we're all not all connected. But in the realm of what is within my power, what is within my purview, there is this enormous terrain of memory, of beauty, of culture, of language and texture and color that is more important in many ways, because, and actually this is part of your question, and I appreciate this part very much, about the memory that's being bequeathed to young people. Some of the most truly touching letters that I've gotten from readers have been from young Palestinians who have said things to me like, our whole family read this book and me and all my siblings feel like we understand our father for the first time. And there was another letter that I got from a young woman who read the Arabic translation, and she said something very similar. And she's actually Palestinian, who lives in the Arab world, and she said she never felt connected to the things that her parents talked about in Palestine until she read a book, until she happened to be my book. This is the power of art and just the power of the novel in general. Elias's book, Gate of the Sun, inspired a whole movement in Palestine where they went to take over, trying to hold their ground on a piece of land, and they decided to call it Bab al-Shams, and so I guess what I'm saying is that I'd like to talk about culture as a force, right? That is that's bigger than politics in many ways. It doesn't have the military and it doesn't have the money, that's true. But I feel like as Palestinians, what we have left, the land is almost, completely pulled out from under our feet. What we have left is memory. And that what we have left is this ancient belonging. And if we let that slip, if we let our memory slip, if we let our story slip and our song and our music, then that is, I think, that is where we lose hope. But we're not. And I think, and the cultural productions, especially of this younger generation, have been so gorgeous and outstanding. And I guess I just wish there was a greater spotlight on that.
Thank you so much. And thank you all for your provocative and thoughtful questions as well. So I know that Mesna, you wanted to kind of close the loop on the earlier conversation. So I want to come back to you. And I know that our collaborator, Dr. Morgenstern, also has a question. And I thought, since we're running out of time, that you could both just voice your questions so that they can just exist there in our minds collectively for people who might be streaming off, and we can hold on for another few minutes for those who are willing to stay on. So Hana, will you ask your question first, and then we'll be able to return to Mesna's a little more deeply since we cut her off earlier.
Yeah, sure. I wanted to ask Susan a question. First of all, I just wanted to say that for me, the fact that the character who goes through a journey of being a sex worker and then becomes a revolutionary, her figuration as a sex worker, it was really moving to me. And I felt like it helped me to kind of work through some sort of personal and political questions of my own. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about positioning somebody who goes through the journey of sex work, also as kind of like the major revolutionary figure of the novel, and how that helps us kind of think through questions of intersectionality, material conditions and also like political traditions that are often defined as like traditionally masculine.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Hana. And Susan, let's hear Mesna's question as well, and then we'll come right back to you.
So I went through like 5 different questions as I'm thinking about this, but the one I want to pin and ask you about, Susan, is to go back to this question of exile and its relationship to the Arab world. And I think one of the things that is profoundly moving about this novel is your meditation on Kuwait and the meanings of Kuwait, and Kuwait as the site of Palestinian life after in exile. And I think relates to this question of sex work too, and a kind of gendered locality for Nahir as this Palestinian figure in exile. So I do want to open up this question about the Palestinian in the Arab world and what you want to say about that. Mm-hmm. And I think what's profound also that links to what you just said is that this is an entire tradition of Palestinian literature to meditate on the relationship of being Palestinian in the world and being in exile and its relationship to feelings of abandonment and annihilation and disappearance, and a sense of dislocation with the territory of Palestine and the idea of Palestine too. So I wanted to open that a little bit, that these kind of overly abstract, these abstractions of the political obscure rather than reveal so much about the kind of the granular relationship Palestinians have with the question of exile. And leave it to you.
Yeah, no, thank you again, both of you, for very, very insightful questions. So, having this novel start out in Kuwait, and most of my novels sort of involve some kind of exiles, and there's multiple places, and because physical place is a part of our struggle, and the other thing is that people often think of Palestinians as just being the Palestinians who are in Palestine, when in fact most Palestinians are actually outside of Palestine. And this is actually a very, and sometimes, even internally, we as Palestinians sort of measure the level of our Palestinianness by, whether we have suffered under occupation or not. And I think these are very dangerous and harmful ideas for us, because these geographic, linguistic, and now psychological boundaries have been created by Israel within our society. And these fragments, the fragmentation of our society, is a result of this colonial project called Israel. And so I think I just, or naturally kind of in everything I do, try to tie these fragments together, because I do view us as a whole people, as an entire society, yes, with many different facets, more so than other societies because of our fragmentation. So having the idea of place plays such a big role in this novel was intentional. As a matter of fact, the novel is divided in sections, and each section is in a different place. And each section begins with a chapter from the cell, from the isolation cell called the cube, and she narrates a different place within that cube. I mean, Nahid has created an entire world within this tiny little space. Regarding, the choice of this woman who is rather trivial, very normal, and just kind of very small ambitions. and then who ends up living on the margins of society and you know, has this whole aura of dishonor around her, is partly because I'm not really interested in perfect people. I'm not interested in heroes. I'm not interested, you know, I don't inhabit, at least in my personal spheres, a masculine world, and I see the heroes that I see in my life that inspire me tend to be women, and they tend to be. I'm interested, I think, in people who are forced to live on the margins of society, and I wanted to take this this woman, this beautiful, incredible, flawed, broken woman, and in all her glory and all her defiance and all her compassion, who is solidly put to teeter on the margins of an already marginalized society. And I wanted to bring the center to her on the margins. I wanted to put her in one of the most celebrated positions in our society, and that is one of a freedom fighter, of a revolutionary. And in doing that, I wanted to grapple. I wanted to just explore all the contradictions and just see what that's like, and all the messiness and the wrinkles and the emotions that accompany that. So that was, you know, yeah, I mean, that was sort of my thinking, but ultimately these characters kind of wrote themselves, I have to say. And the other thing is, you know, I've kind of been, with this book, not as much as I expected, though. I expected a lot more criticism because of the sexuality. But one of the, you know, I really, writing sexuality is, I think, hard in general, because, you know, there's a line, like, how do you write without tripping over cliches and things like that. But with Nahid, especially when she does fall in love, that was like one of the most wonderful things for me as a writer to explore, because I really hate the way that popular media depicts sex and in Hollywood, you know, you have this like really passionate encounter, and then they have sex and it's wonderful and everything's perfect and everything fits, and then they're just tired afterwards or whatever. But, you know, I wanted to take these two people, Nahid, whose entire sexual experience her whole life had been deeply traumatic. She was raped. She was a sex worker, and so and then Bilal, who was broken in many ways. He was physically broken by being, you know, some of the things he had to endure in Israeli prisons. And I just wanted to really explore what it would mean for the two of them to fall in love and then finally connect physically. And how one can be deeply intimate with another person before being physically intimate, or without it entirely, and how one could come to terms with, you know, with desires when your body just isn't responding the way you want it to. So I wanted it to be messy, and I wanted to, because our lives are messy, humans are messy, and you know, I have more questions in life than I do answers, and that was what I was hoping would come from the encounters throughout Nahid's life.
Thank you so much, Susan. We could stay here forever with the two of you, but I know we're a little bit over time, so I'll just wrap up. I noticed there was a question in the audience about the role of silence in your work and in your thinking at large, Elias, which is something that I think about a lot in relation to your writing. So I just wanted to close with a quote from Audre Lorde on silence. She says, "In the cause of silence, each of us draws the face of our own fear of contempt, of censure, of some judgment or recognition of challenge, of annihilation. But most of all, I think we fear the visibility without which we cannot truly live. I think that paradox of being terrified of a visibility that your life depends on is so critical to the conversations that we're having, but also to the artistic and literary production of the Middle East. And I'm really, really grateful that we have this space through these collaborations in this series to be in a room with one another from diaspora, from all over the world. The pain of being in exile is so haunting and so physically searing that, you know, there's a lot of grace and just comfort in being part of this series and being in a room together in this way as a way of enduring ongoing Nakba and Nakbas. So thank you all for being here. Thank you so much, dear Elias and dear Susan, for joining us. We will encourage you guys all to sign up for our listserv. Alyssa, our program assistant, kindly put the link in the chat here. We have a website, Literatures of Annihilation, Exile and Resistance, where you can read more about each of the initiatives and also join our listserv for upcoming talks.